Greetings. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another Walk Magick video. So today I'm continuing with the essay attached to the back half of Liber V, vel Reguli. Let's begin. Let me preface this. I have notes and a script up through the formula of LAShTAL, which is about a third of the way through this essay. After that, I'm just going to be reading and then commenting as I feel, whatever moves me. After the formula of LAShTAL, the essay takes a turn towards ideas that are thelemic and focused on, if you're using Liber V, vel Reguli, which is an invocation of the thelemic forces and current, these are aspects of what that looks like in the real world, because the law is applicable to doing your will in the world. So ideals and situations based on how applying the law would make the world look. So I'll be doing that off the cuff, but with all of that said, let's start the essay section. Quote, "Here followeth an impression of the ideas implied in this pain. I also am a star in space, unique and self-existent, an individual essence incorruptible. I also am one soul. I am identical with the all and none. I am in all and all in me. I am apart from all and Lord of all and one with all." End quote. So just refreshing on the ritual section, it is an invocation of the thelemic energies, Nuit, Hadit, Rahor Kuit, the Holy Guardian Angel, energy centers, and to fully grasp requires an understanding of very many subjects, not the least of which is Kabbalah. The above quote and what follows in the next couple paragraphs is a stylized invoking of the key points of what the ritual does and what it means to be human, living an enlightened path. It's also an affirmation of that enlightened path and what it means to be, a spiritual being, incarnate. So a star in space is a central point in infinite space, Hadit and Nuit. The rest is all about 0 equals 2, everything else that was said. The light made conscious matter, a microcosm who is still part of the whole, which can realize its union and conquer the illusion of division, right? All of those things said, I'm identical with the all and none, right? Just as the universe is 2, but it's also nothing at the same time, simultaneously. Keep in mind, we all have an entire universe within us, just as we are in the universe. It is one thing to intellectually know that we are all gods, but that is barely a milestone. You have to actualize this. It requires deep understanding, removing the boundaries which bar us from that actualization, and rigorous invocations of the proper energies. Remember this quote from Liber V, which text is vital to the Babe of the Abyss, almost instructional for making the journey from Chesed to Binah. Quote from Liber V, verse 21. "And the end thereof is known, not even unto Our Lady, or to the beast whereon she rideth, nor unto the Virgin her daughter, nor unto Chaos her lawful lord. But unto the crowned child is it known? It is not known if it be known." End quote. So you can never know the end of the path because it's nothing. You can't know nothing. We can know the product of that nothingness, which also exists in the here and now, and we can analyze that product and get a gleaming of the source. I'll talk more about that momentarily. Nevertheless, we are the all and individual, therefore the product and none at all. So here I'm also not going to use too much of a script. There are 5 short paragraphs. I'll read and stop for comments as I go through them. Quote, "I am a god, I, very god of very god. I go upon my way to work my will. I have made matter in motion for my mirror." End quote. We are Hadit going through space. Hadit is the motion of doing one's will. Rahor Kuit is the product of doing that will upon some type of matter, external to oneself. Quote, I have decreed for my delight that nothingness should figure itself as twain. So that's the 0 equals 2. That I might dream a dance of names and natures, and enjoy the substance of simplicity by watching the wandering of my shadows. End quote. The substance of simplicity, a dance of names and natures. So I plan on doing a video on why we use gematria, right? And I'll talk more about this in that video upcoming, because it's important when you're analyzing magical formula in words of power, like LAShTAL, which we're going to do today. These things are symbolic representations. They are labels that express some type of thing. So keep that in mind. Quote, I am not that which is not. I know not that which knows not. I love not that which loves not. So that's dualities. For I am love, whereby division dies in delight. I am knowledge, whereby all parts plunged in the whole perish and pass into perfection. And I am that I am, which is the name of Kether, the highest. The being wherein being is lost in nothing, nor designs to be, but its will to unfold its nature, its need to express its perfection in all possibilities, each phase a partial phantasm, and yet inevitable and absolute. End quote. Think of the Book of the Law, chapter 1. None breathe the light, faint and fairy of the stars, and 2. None, that nothingness, that source, right? Breathe the light, that divine light, which is still in union, so there's no separation. And we'll talk about this also in this video. In order for anything to have a meaning, it has to have relation to something else. If you just have one infinite thing, there's nothing to analyze. There's no parts to it, so there's nothing to analyze. It's essentially nothing, but it's a oneness, right? So none breathe the light, faint and fairy, which is like this gossamer thing that you can't really see. Fae, it's this mythological thing almost, this invisible light. And 2. None breathe the light, faint and fairy of the stars. And 2. It's like the stars in space are constantly shedding light into the universe, but if that light doesn't have something to reflect off of, you can't see that light. Hence the universe looks black, except for where it bounces off of planets, which don't have a light source of their own. Generally speaking, they have magma, which would give light, but an opaque ball, that's what allows you to see light, right? If I was in a void and I turn on a light, there's nothing to reflect that light, therefore that light would just keep going infinitely in all directions, and it wouldn't bounce back, there would be no sight to it. Quote, I am omniscient, for naught exists for me unless I know it. That's exactly what I just said. So we are everywhere, this same oneness, that we are part of that source. Our true self, the self of self, Yachaira, the self of self, the highest part of the soul, exists in all things. For naught exists for me unless I know it. Therefore, there has to be an individual in order to know the different components of that self of self, which is all things. We get into this really crazy, mind-bending reflection on the nature of the universe already here. Quote, I am omnipotence, for naught occurs save by necessity. So that's talking about sort of almost like a destiny, although there is free will in that, but we're all stars on a course, right? It's just a matter of accepting that course, which is also somewhat of another contradiction that the master of the temple has to grapple with. It's like, we have wills to do, which is one thing that we are incarnated to do, but we could do anything. It comes, yes, we have free will, but we also have this predestined of the stars. Things are doing things, whether we want them to or not. And so we're going to experience things, and we call it karma. There's actions, and then there's further things that happen as a result of those actions. For naught occurs by necessity, my soul's expression through my will to be, to do, to suffer the symbols of itself. I am omnipresent, for naught exists where I am not. It's talking about that highest part of the soul, that highest self, that Kether, which is everywhere, permeating everything, also not there. Who fashioned space as a condition of my consciousness of myself, who am the center of all, and my circumference the frame of mine own fancy. End quote. Right, so I mean, just to reiterate again, it's the same exact thing. You need an individual self, which is that too, but then there's also the not, which is everything in union, which ceases to exist because the two, and we'll get more into this. I've spoken about this so many times, it's almost making my mouth dry trying to rehash. Quote, I am the all, for all that exists for me is a necessary expression in thought of some tendency of my nature, and all my thoughts are only the letters of my name. End quote. Every letter is a symbol. It encompasses specific ideas, and those ideas can be attached to sound, those ideas can be attached to number. They're all expressions of the universe. Magical names, the name of God, these are also expressions of the divine nature of the universe. For naught exists, for naught ex- for all that exists for me is a necessary expression in thought. So it's coming from this idea that thought manifests, and we analyze the humanness that we have to understand godlyhood, and so we assume it's very similar on that sense. There's air, and we'll get into LAShTAL, which connects to this. There's airy aspect, which is symbolized by thought, right? And thought manifests through word, through deed, but the beginning of action is thought. Quote, I am the none, for all that I am is the imperfect image of the perfect. Each partial phantom must perish in the clasp of its counterpart. This is that duality part, which is the nothingness, because the two parts of our nature, this passive and active polarities that we each have in us, if brought into perfect union, kind of obliterate each other, and we rise up into godhood. Each form fulfill itself by finding its equated opposite and satisfying its need to be the absolute by the attainment of annihilation. End quote. Now we move on to what I consider the crux of this essay and ritual, which is the formula of LAShTAL. Quote, the word LAShTAL includes all this, end quote, meaning that which is already commented upon prior. Note that the origin of the formula of LAShTAL the origin is unknown to, and my assumption that it was created by Crowley. I've seen no evidence that it was ever used in the Golden Dawn, though Crowley placed it in the Magician's Tables in Liber 500, corresponding with line 0, the Ein Sof. So maybe there was something in papers that I'm missing from the Golden Dawn, but I'm completely unaware, and I've asked around a lot over the years. So I'm leaning towards the opinion that Crowley devised the magical formula LAShTAL on his own, but I could be wrong on that. So could have came from the Golden Dawn, could have been from some other text, I don't know. So we can already see, based on the fact that it's line 0, the Ein Sof, that there is a creative force attributed to this word. Quote, La is not, nothing. L, two, end quote. The source and the product. The nothingness which has two opposites, which when combined cancel one another out, leaving in their wake a third thing. Now let's look at the components, the letters and structure of the word. Quote, L is justice, the cates fulfilled by the phallus. Naught and two, because the plus and the minus have united in love under will. End quote. The adjustment card in the tarot deck, Lamed, corresponds with Libra, the scales, a balance harmonizing twain forces. The word LAShTAL wraps in on itself, beginning with La, ending with L, LA, and then AL. Consider the Taoist formula of the Tao Day, the nothingness and the yin-yang, opposing forces which are the product of that nothingness, which go on to create lower forces that also contain opposites. You could look at the trigrams and the hexagrams, which also summarize this equilibrating of forces in its various forms. In Hermetic/Thelemic terms, think the king and queen, followed by the prince and princess of tarot. There's also the sun and moon, followed by Mars and Venus, the mother and father, the son and daughter. Opposites of different planes. The point is, there are two L's in the formula, and I see them as that which is above and that which is below. Nothing and duality, for lack of a better term. And both of these have these opposites in them. So I have a long lecture. I have multiple lectures on 0 equals 2, so see those about the positive and negative forces, or plus and minus, as the above quote says, and we'll get more into it in a moment anyway, but yeah, I think those lectures do it really well justice. Quote, A is the fool, naught in thought, Parzival, word, Harpocrates, and action, Bacchus. He is the boundless air, the wandering ghost, but with possibilities. He is the naught that the two have made by love under will. End quote. Aleph is obviously the first letter of the alphabet. 0 in the tarot, 1 by gematria. A product of the nothingness, but still without any concrete form, only potential followed by action eventually. That's the highest form of the fool. Talk about the lower form of the fool in a second, but it's basically just trying everything. Just as every star has potential and then runs its own unique course. That there is 2 alephs and that it corresponds with air, I think worth mentioning that the air correspondence of the letter has different meanings depending on what plane you are analyzing it from. At its highest, air is the void, no different than the divine light or the ether. In the lowest sense, it is the intellect, it is breath, it is spirit, it is space. In both the highest and lowest expressions, it is thought. The point is, as above, so below. Quote, La thus represents the ecstasy of Nuit and Hadit conjoined, lost in love and making themselves naught thereby. Their child is begotten and conceived, but it is in the phase of naught also, as yet. La is thus the universe in that phase with its potentialities of manifestation. End quote. The nothingness is composed of the 2 parts. Think Tao Day in union, yin-yang as separate parts, in division ready for union. The result of the union of 2 things has an offspring, the child, Harpocrates, which again represents infinite possibilities but still unmanifested. Quote, L, on the contrary, though it is essentially identical with La, shows the full manifested through the equilibrium of contraries. Hence the A is before, the fool is before, so the fool takes action and 2 things follow and creates these opposite forces. The weight is still nothing, but it is expressed as it were 2 equal weights in opposite scales. The indicator still points to 0. End quote. Think of the king and queen of tarot having the prince and princess offspring. There's the 2 highest having give rise to the multitudes, who, like their parents, have the same nature of contradictories. They are identical in principle, though now manifest. We have then the formula of Tetragrammaton concealed in the formula of LAShTAL. Quote, Shet is equally 31 with La and L, but it expresses the secret nature which operates the magic of the transmutations. Excuse me. Shet is the formula of this particular aeon. Another aeon might have another way of saying 31. End quote. La and L both equal 31 by gematria. Shin and Teth are the tarot trumps 20 and 11 respectively, equaling 31, 20 plus 11. Being that L, La, and Shet then each have 31 attributed to them, 31 times 3 equals 93, the value of thelema and agape, will and love. But how does Shet, quote, operate the magic or the transmutations? Quote, Shin is fire as T is force, or Teth is force, conjoined they express Rahor Kuit, end quote. Fire is aspirations, the need to do one's will. Force is the push to do it. Quote, Teth, the serpent, the sun, courage, and sexual love are all indicated by the card. End quote. That's the lust card. Right? Quote, the angel, or now the aeon, represents the stele 666, showing the gods of the aeon, while strength, or lust, is a picture of Babylon and the beast, the earthly emissaries of those gods. End quote. So thus we have a complete formula of the universe, above and below, in La and El, in Shin, which has a triple flame, in the Hebrew letter shape, the entire pantheon of the Lema, meaning the point in space or the individual star, infinite space upon which to do the will, and the result of that will in the child. Rahor Kuit is what is done, in Harpocrates rest the infinite potentials of what can be. Then in Teth, Babylon and the beast, the lower forms of Nuit and Hadit representing the ability to achieve union. Quote, in La, note that Saturn or Satan is exalted in the house of Venus or Astarte, and it is in an airy sign. Thus L is Father, Mother, two and naught, and the Spirit, Holy Ghost, of their love is also naught. Love is a Hebea, 13, which is Achad, unity, one, Aleph, who is the full, who is not, but nonetheless an individual one, who, as such, is not another, yet unconscious of himself until his oneness expresses itself as a duality." Lamed corresponds with Libra. Libra is ruled by Venus, and Saturn is exalted therein. What Crowley is saying is that the highest Nuit and Hadit reside in their love embrace as the universe, or concealed by the Lord of Matter. Their offspring contained in Aleph is the Holy Ghost. Love and unity are synonymous by Gematria, 13. Love requires two to make one, the value of Aleph, which is naught, the canceling out of the two to zero, the full, Atu zero, in unity. This child, though being individual and yet naught, is unconscious of his own being as in union. So it expresses in the world of polarities, opposites, connecting back to Satan, the keeper of hell, the unconscious. Quote, "Any impression or idea is unknowable in itself. It can mean nothing until brought into relation with other things. The first step is to distinguish one thought from another. This is the condition of recognizing it. To define it, we must perceive its orientation to all our other ideas. The extent of our knowledge of any one thing varies therefore with the number of ideas with which we can compare it. Every new fact not only adds itself to our universe, but increases the value of what we already possess." End quote. So what's described there is every experience you have gives rise to thought, an understanding of that experience. The more experiences you experience, the more you have to put them in relation to other experiences, compare them, grapple with them, understand them. Now, there's also the practice in Hermetic Kabbalah. It's a definite and mandatory practice to work out connecting any one path or sphere with each and every other path and sphere. By doing so, you can gain a full understanding of the universe and its mechanisms in all ways. Quote, "In L, this the, or God, arranges for the countenance to behold countenance by establishing itself as an equilibrium. Aleph, the one naught, conceived as Lamed, the naught too. This Lamed is the son-daughter Horus Hippocrates, just as the other L was the father-mother Set Isis. Here then is Tetragrammaton once more, but expressed in identical equations in which every term is perfect in itself as a mode of naught. Shet is a necessary resolution of the apparent opposition of La and El, for one could hardly pass to the other without the catalytic action of a third identical expression whose function should be to transmute them. Such a term must be in itself a mode of naught, and its nature cannot encroach the perfections of not being, La, or of being, El. It must be purely nothing motion, as they are purely nothing motion, so as to create a matter in motion, which is a function of something." End quote. So to simplify, La is like the Ein Sof, or above the abyss, everything in union. Shet, the lightning flash, and El, the manifest. So you could think of it, these are not exact correspondences, but think of LAShTAL as the highest, El as the lowest. Each have these equal and opposite twin forces in them, but in different ways. And then there's that lightning flash down the tree of life that connect the highest and the lowest. That's Shet. You could think of it like that. It might help. Both the higher and lower exist simultaneously, but a force has to direct and change that energy from one form to another. Thus Shet is motion in its double phase, an inertia composed of two opposite currents, and each current is also thus polarized. Shin is heaven and earth, Teth, male and female. Shet is spirit and matter. One is the word of liberty and love, flashing its light to restore life to earth. The other is the act by which life claims that love is light and liberty. And these are two in one, the divine letter of science and speech, whose symbol is the sun in the arms of the moon." End quote. So from here, I'm going to be going off script. I'll read through and speak casually whenever I feel I can contribute or interpret the rest of the thesis. Quote, "This is in fact the formula of our magic. We insist that all acts must be equal, that existence asserts the right to exist, that unless evil is a mere term expressing some relation of haphazard hostility between forces equally self-justified, the universe is as inexplicable and impossible as uncompensated action, that the orgies of Bacchus and Pan are no less sacramental than the masses of Jesus, that the scars of syphilis are sacred and worthy of honor as much as the wounds of the martyrs of Mary." End quote. So there's a lot said right there. It's very agorai, right? Left-hand tantric, that all things are sacred. And we'd have to redefine, if we're going to use terms like good and evil, what evil is. So every force in the universe is justified. So if there's some type of force that's trying to unjustify the forces, try to stop forces from existing, even though they have a right to exist, we could call that evil. But no act in and of itself is evil, save unless it's trying to do the opposite of what existence does, right? It's extremely liberal, the rights of man. It's like good and evil are human terms. Nature just does what it does, but humans create these complex bylaws that we have to live by. So we are self-justified to exist as individual stars. So the only thing that could be considered evil is to stop something from existing or stop it from expressing its nature, which has a right to express itself, right? As far as like the sexual innuendos go, I thought it was very interesting. Just want to read a couple of quotes from Liber V, verses 22 and then 28. "All corpses are sacred unto me. They shall not be touched save in my mine Eucharist. All lonely places are sacred unto me. Where one man gathereth himself together in my name, there will I leap forth in the midst of him. I am the hideous God, and who mastereth me is uglier than I. All things are sacred to me. No thing is sacred from me." Verse 29, "For there is no holiness where I am not." Right? So it's like Pan is all. So it's just trying to live in line with nature. That's the formula of doing one's will and Thelema in a nutshell. Quote, "It should be unnecessary to insist that the above ideas apply only to the absolute. Toothache is still painful, and deceit degrading to a man, relative to his situation in the world of illusion. He does his will by avoiding them, but the existence of quote-unquote evil is fatal to philosophy so long as it is supposed to be independent of conditions," right? This inherent evil. "And to accustom the mind to make no difference between any two ideas as such is to emancipate it from the thraldom of terror. We affirm on our altars of faith in ourselves and our wills our love of all aspects of the absolute." So sometimes the absolute is painful. Doesn't mean it's evil. You have to learn how to deal with everything in its proper course. Quote, "And we make the spirit shin combined with the flesh teth in a single letter, whose value is 31, even as those of La the naught and El the all, to complete their not being and being with its becoming, to mediate between identical extremes as their mean, the secret that sunders and seals them. It declares that all somethings are equally shadows of nothing, and justifies nothing in its futile folly of pretending that something is stable, by making us aware of a method of magic through the practice of which we may partake in the pleasure of the process." Quote, and unquote, here in this very next paragraph is a practice that I've spoken about in one of the sex magic videos, specifically talking about poisons in that section of the video. Let me just read this. Quote, "The magician should devise for himself a definite technique for destroying evil. The essence of such a practice will consist in training the mind and the body to confront things which cause fear, pain, disgust, shame, and the like. He must learn to endure them, then to become indifferent to them, then to become indifferent to them, then to analyze them, until they give pleasure and instruction, and finally to appreciate them for their own sake as aspects of truth. End quote. So I've spoken about this in many times. When you have an aversion to something, you need to confront whatever it is that you are averse to. You need to take that into your being as an aspect of Nuit, experience it, and if you have a fear attached to it, you need to uproot that fear. However you need to do that is based on your brain chemistry and your thought patterns and experiential evidence that you've picked up in your life that teaches you how you could best do things. For myself, when I'm afraid of something, I like to throw myself full force into it, and it's either going to destroy me or I'm going to conquer it. Now, there are reasonable things to not do. There are probably certain substances, cyanide, that you cannot grow tolerant to. Therefore, you don't have to be afraid of them, just you wouldn't ingest it. Unless it would be your will to ingest it, which that's pretty easy to do. It'd be painful, but you see what I mean? Situational things that cause anxiety or fear, but have no justified reason for. Learn to incorporate those as aspects of Nuit. Learn to appreciate them as aspects of the absolute. Learn not to hate anything. Learn to don't make no difference between any one thing and any other thing. It's a very powerful practice. Quote, when this has been done, he should abandon them, if they are really harmful in relation to health and comfort. Also, our selection of evils is limited to those that cannot damage us irreparably. Example, one ought to practice smelling asafoetida until one likes it, but not arsine or hydrocyanic acid. I just said, cyanide. Again, one might have a liaison with an ugly woman until one beheld and loved the star which she is. It would be too dangerous to overcome the distaste for dishonesty by forcing oneself to pick pockets. You do not want to do stuff that, if you cannot interfere with other people's will, and if their will is to have their property, that's something that they earn because they need that to do their will, and you take that from them, you are impugning upon their will to their own person, to their property, to live as they will. So you have to do this within the confines of Liber V. I think one of the most important things is sexual expression. If you know 100% this is your identity for sure, great. I still think that you should explore, and especially the postures that you are most uncomfortable with. There is something very life-changing that you can experience by conquering sexual things that you are suppressing or that scare you, to be frank. But again, do things within the bounds of never hurting yourself unrepairably, as the quote just said. Quote, acts which are essentially dishonorable must not be done. They should be justified only by calm contemplation of their correctness in abstract cases. Love is a virtue. It grows stronger and purer and less selfish by applying it to what it loathes. But theft is a vice involving the slave idea that one's neighbor is superior to oneself. It is admirable only for its power to develop certain moral and mental qualities in primitive types. To prevent the atrophy of such faculties as our own vigilance, and for the interest which it adds to the tragedy man. Crime, folly, sickness, and all such phenomena must be contemplated with complete freedom from fear, aversion, and shame. Otherwise we shall fail to see accurately and interpret intelligently, in which case we shall be unable to outwit and outfight them. Anatomists and physiologists grappling in the dark with death have one hygiene, surgery, prophylaxis, and the rest for mankind. So, it depends on what your will is and where you are in life. Obviously not everybody's going to become a morgue practitioner because they're scared of corpses or death, but there are practices in which you can face death. Liber HHH is one I spoke over that in depth, just for one example, and you never know what's going to come out of that, right? It's like, for the longest time, dead bodies were thought to just carry disease, and we disposed of them. Come to study, the body after post-mortem, we've learned a lot about how to prolong life, how to prevent disease, what diseases targeted what parts of the body based on symptoms and what things look like, right? So there's things that can come out of this in a factual way. Anthropologists, archaeologists, physicists, and other men of science risking thumbscrews, stake, infamy, and ostracism, have torn the spider snare of superstition to shreds and broken in pieces the monstrous idol of morality, the murderous Moloch, which has made mankind its meat throughout history. You know, there was a time not long ago people were getting persecuted for practicing science, trying to create medicine, trying to understand things on a biological and physiological level in the universe, right? Um, and that fear of persecution, they won out because they pursued it. They overcame those fears. They threw themselves into this thing that they've been taught is so evil and taboo, is inherently evil, you should not do. Right? Each fragment of that corporal light, it manifests as an image of some brute lust, some torpid dullness, some ignorant instinct, or some furtive fear shapen in its own savage mind. Man is indeed not wholly freed even now. He is still trampled under the hooves of the stampeding mules that nightmare bore to its wild ass, his creative forces that he had not mastered, the sterile ghosts that he called gods. End quote. So take a look at yourself. Right? What are the things that you are afraid to do that you postpone doing? What do you need to be doing? What creative forces have you not mastered? What is stopping you from doing your will? Is it situational? Is it a fear of not having money? Is it a fear of not survival? Figure out what that is and uproot that fear and go do your will. It's scary sometimes, but that's the course of doing your will. Is figuring out how to do it and then do it. For myself, I had to do things that were societally not acceptable. Transitioning was one. A lot of, I can cite a lot of sources from my life. I'm not going to do that. Take a look at your own life. Figure out exactly who you are. If you're afraid of doing something, but you need to do it, you need to figure out a way to get rid of that fear. You need to confront it head on and do that thing until it becomes a holy sacrament. Quote, "Their mystery cows men still. They fear, they flinch, they dare not face the phantoms." That could even be greed. Look at how many people are hoarding wealth today because they're afraid of their own insecurities. So the more wealth they accumulate, they feel they are a better person, they are more confident, and they're still miserable. Most of them, at least, I would think. Rotten, terrible, bitter, awful people that could really reshape the world in the most positive light if they all came together and put their resources towards betterment of the planet, and they don't. Well, what's stopping them? Well, it's some type of fear of insecurity. They need to lord over other people, even though they're inadequate to do so, right? These type of fears need to be uprooted in the human species, and I believe they will be. It's just a matter of how and when. I firmly believe in this statement when it comes to doing your will. Either let go or be dragged. You're going to be pushed into doing your will eventually. It may not be this incarnation, but yeah, you'll be dragged along the way. It's not going to be comfortable. Quote, "Still too, the fallen fetish seems awful. It is frightful to them that there is no longer an idol to adore with anthems, and to appease with the flesh of their firstborn. Each scrambles in the bloody mire of the floor to snatch some scrap for a relic, that he may bow down to it and serve it. So even today, a mass of maggots swarm heaving over the carrion earth, a brotherhood bound by blind greed for rottenness. Science still hesitates to raise the temple of Rimmon, though every year finds more of her sons impatient of Naaman's prudence. The privy council of the kingdom of Mansoul sits in the permanent secret session. It dares not declare what must follow its deeds in shattering the monarch morality into scraps of crumbling conglomerate of climactic, tribal, and personal prejudices, corrupted yet more by the action of crafty ambition, insane impulse, ignorant arrogance, superstitious hysteria, fear fashioning falsehoods on the stone that it sets on the grave of truth, whom it has murdered and buried in the black earth oblivion." End quote. This was written 100 years ago. Has anything, changed on these notes? We still fear people who are not like us, speaking generally. We allow ourselves to be lied to when somebody panders to our either emotions or our fears, right? We let ourselves be cowed. How many people are so superstitious? You mentioned the occult, and what's the first thing they're going to think of? Not science, not an understanding of the self and universe. No, the first thing they think of is devil worshiper. And it's like, okay, so ignorance is still reigning, superstition is still reigning. How many people still, do superstitious things with no evidence that it works whatsoever, but it's just become ingrained in their upbringing, culture, psyche, whatever. We're literally fighting for the soul of the planet right now. If you don't know that, if you can't look at it, uh, it'll be all right eventually, but it might be all right without mankind on the face of the planet, and that's a reality. Um, Not to be too grim about it, but yeah, this work is really fucking important right now. Quote, moral philosophy, psychology, sociology, anthropology, mental pathology, physiology, and many another of the children of wisdom, of whom she is justified, well know that the law of ethics are a chaos of confused conventions, based at best on customs convenient in certain conditions, more often on the craft or caprice of the biggest, the most savage, heartless, cunning, and bloodthirsty brutes of the pack, to secure their power or pander to their pleasure and cruelty. End quote. Look at any government. The people who have set laws which seem reasonable on paper implement them in the most inhumane, cruel, fucked up, debased ways. Am I wrong? You know? A lot of people are missing the point. People in science still don't understand the universe. People in physiology still don't understand the brain. And it's like, these are good things to work towards. But right now we have this quandrum. We have a solution in Thelema. We have a solution in the occult for understanding so many different things. And if I think these basics of the occult were understood, they would influence all of these other areas from law, governance, psychology, sociology, physiology, et cetera, medicine. It would influence all of these fields in such a profound way. One of the best psychologists, Carl Jung, was studying the occult, and he took a lot of occult ideas and just repackaged them into psychology, and Freud gave birth to psychology, and Jung really took it to a next direction, which then made it more widespread, I guess you would say, right? Quote, there is no principle, even a false one, to give coherence to the clamor of ethical propositions. Yet the very men that have smashed Moloch have strewn the earth with shapeless rubble. End quote. Look at leaders. Whoever's the strong person seems to be the people in power, and they're all fucking morons who have no clue what they're doing, and they're literally destroying so many good things. Those who fight against it in the past have led us to this moment where we are now, and so we've destroyed these idols to all of those vices, superstitions, and hatred and fear and all of those things. We've destroyed those idols, and we've built rubble, which is not stable to be constructing upon. We don't have a sure foundation, globally speaking, right now as a species. So we need to remodel so many different things. Eventually, the tower is going to come down, and it's a matter of, are we just going to build on top of the rubble of the tower, or are we going to take the time to dig a proper foundation and build up carefully so it's not the tower, Quote, while Malak ruled, all men were bound by one law, and by the oracles of them that, knowing the fraud, feared not, but were his priests and wardens of his mystery. What now? How can any of us, though wise and strong as never was known, prevail on men to act in concert, now that each prays to his own chip of God, and yet knows every other chip to be a worthless ort, dream dust, ape dung, tradition bone, or what not else? So science begins to see that the initiates were maybe not merely silly and selfish in making their rule of silence, and in practicing philosophy from the profane. Yet still she hopes that the mischief may not prove mortal, and begs that things may go on much as usual until that secret session decide on some plan of action. It has always been fatal when somebody finds out too much too suddenly. If John Huss had cackled more like a hen, he might have survived Michaelmas and been esteemed for his eggs. The last 50 years have laid the axe of analysis to the root of every axiom. They are triflers who content themselves with loping the blossoming twigs of our beliefs, or the bows of our intellectual instruments. We can no longer assert any single proposition unless we guard ourselves by enumerating countless conditions which must be assumed. This digression has outstayed its welcome. It was only invented by wisdom, that it might warn rashness of the dangers that encompass even sincerity, energy, and intelligence when they happen not to contribute to fitness in their environment. The magician must be wary in his use of his powers. He must make every act not only accord with his will, but with the properties of his position at the time. Right? End quote. Doing your will is very precarious because you can know what your will is, but you have to wait for that opportune moment. So in the meantime, you have to be setting yourself up to do your will later on when that opportunity arises. We're also at a point where many people are just incapable of doing their will. You have to try regardless, but due to extraneous factors, therefore a lot of people's wills have to be to make their world in a place where they could do their will, where hopefully next incarnation they can do it. Others have that opportunity. Sometimes when you're doing your will, you get the inertia of the universe to assist you. Some things are more long term, but you should always be working towards that. At the same time, I think it's justifiable that everybody who's doing their will, at least a small portion of that time, should be to deconstructing what is not working with the world and coming into concert to agree, hey, this thing does not work. How do we change these aspects of the psyche globally? How do we change these aspects of society globally? How do we, implement the law globally? It might be my will to reach the foot of a cliff, but the easiest way, also the speediest, most direct, least obstructed, the way of minimum effort, would be simply to jump. I should have destroyed my will in the act of fulfilling it, or what I mistook for it. For the true will has no goal, its nature being to go. And that's coming into union with the divine, which is here and now. And you just need to flip that switch internally and connect with it. However, you have to do that. Similarly, a parabola is bound by one law which fixes its relations with two straight lines at every point. Yet it has no end short of infinity, and it continually changes its direction. The initiate who is aware who he is can always check his conduct by reference to the determination of his curve and calculate his past, future, his bearings, and his proper course at any assigned moment. And Crowley writes about this in many places, where it's like sometimes you try to veer a little off course and all you have to do is just readjust. When something feels completely wrong, you need to take a look, put it in the journal, or talk it out with somebody, or however you do it for yourself, and just figure, oh yeah, this is a little bit crooked. Let me narrow my path and keep going back straight on my course. He can even comprehend himself as a simple idea. He may attain to measure fellow parabolas, ellipses that cross his path. So think of yourself in relation to other people if that helps. Sometimes you run your ideas by other egos to see what kind of feedback you get, and then you make your own decision about how you want to do stuff. Perhaps he may come at long last, leaping beyond the limits of his own law, to conceive that sublimely stupendous outrage to reason, the cone. Utterly inscrutable to him, he is yet well aware that he exists in the nature thereof, that he is necessary thereto, that he is ordered thereby, and that therefrom he is sprung from the loins of so fearful a father. His own infinity becomes zero in relation to that of the least fragment of the solid. End quote. Right? We are complicated beings because we make ourselves complicated. If you could, I've said this many times also, path of initiation is decluster fucking oneself, reducing yourself back to the nothingness. Number gets more complicated the higher it goes up because it represents more things. Well, the process of initiation is going backwards towards that initial number 0 as close as possible and just coming into union. Skipping just a tiny bit ahead, quote, the true will is thus both determined by its equations, and free because those equations are simply its own name, spelt out fully. His sense of being under bondage comes from his inability to read it. So just understanding yourself, that's why we take magical names and magical mottos that are aligned with our nature, which are expressions of our highest ideal to be part of this universe. Right? His sense of being under bondage comes from the inability to read that name. His sense that evil exists to thwart him arises when he begins to learn to read, reads wrong, and is obstinate that his error is an improvement. So don't be so rigid. Also, you have to be honest at all times, and sometimes being honest is hard to do when you're in fully thinking that you're correct. So it's always analyzing everything about yourself and double checking and being a little skeptical. Was my action correct, even if you felt it really was? So there's one long paragraph and two short paragraphs. I was going to skip ahead, but let's just get through this. Quote, we know only one thing: absolute existence, absolute motion, absolute direction, absolute simultaneity, absolute truth. All such ideas. They have not and never can have any real meaning, because they're in union. There's nothing besides that one thing. If a man in delirium tremens fell into the Hudson River, he might remember the proverb and clutch at an imaginary straw. Words such as truth are like that straw. Confusion of thought is concealed, and its impotence denied by the invention. This paragraph opened with "we know," yet questioned "we." Make haste to deny the possibility of possessing, or even of defining knowledge. What could be more certain to a parabola philosopher that he could be approached in two ways and two only? It would be indeed little less that the whole body of his knowledge implied in the theory of his definition of himself and confirmed by every single experience. He could receive impressions only by meeting A or being caught up by B. Yet he would be wrong in an infinite number of ways. There are therefore Aleph equals 0 possibilities that any moment a man may find himself totally transformed. And it may be that our present dazzled bewilderment is due to our recognition of the existence of a new dimension of thought, which seems so inscrutably infinite and absurd and immoral, because we have not studied it long enough to appreciate that its laws are identical with our own, though extended to new conceptions. The discovery of radioactivity created a momentary chaos in chemistry and physics, but it soon led to a fuller interpretation of old ideas. Many aspects of the universe, including Hawking radiation, right, and black hole theories. It dispersed many difficulties, harmonized many discords, and yea, more. It shewed the substance of universe as a simplicity of light and life, manners to compose atoms themselves capable of deeper self-realization through fresh complexities and organizations. The rearranging of the atoms, right? It's like, this is besides the point, but we live in this universe where if you look around you, anywhere on this earth, there are, I don't know how many billions or trillions of atoms and particles buzzing and buzzing and bouncing into each other to create more complex physical objects. I was having a conversation recently where it's like, how many people are actually questioning why this thing is here and what we're doing here? As an individual, you're made up of those same particles. I'm looking at a little tabletop in front of me. That tabletop is also made up of particles. It's just that these little teeny tiny Lego blocks happen to structure themselves into two totally different complex beings based on the necessity of those things, right? We actually, transform certain materials into more complex things. Well, it's the same process that the universe goes to. Like, for instance, there's a tree, I cut down the tree, I make a table out of the wood, right? I'm transmuting one thing into another thing. Well, it's the same thing that the universe is constantly doing, and it's just more evidence that our humanness is in some way symbolic of divine nature. We operate in exactly the same way that the universe operates. We transmute things, whether it's by necessity, whether it's by chance. Whether that necessity and chance are exactly the same thing, and both of those words don't even describe what it really is. You see what I'm saying? But anyway, my point was, like, how many people are actually looking at how unbelievable all of this stuff going on around us is, and yet get caught up in bullshit for petty wants and desires, and end up making a mess of this really beautiful thing that we have here. That we could be taking the time to understand, analyze, and really embrace. And then we know what to do with it now. We have this formula of doing your will and how that operates, and how if you infract upon that law, it enacts some type of recompensation for that infraction. Anyway, quote, it revealed the omnipresence of Hadid, identical with himself, yet fulfilling himself by dividing his interplay with Nuit into episodes, each form of his energy isolated with each aspect of her receptivity. So it's like doing your will. You have static and active. Active hadith, static nuit. Hadith is constantly working upon nuit, and it's happening everywhere all at once, independent of any one person. Delight developing in delight, continuous from complex to complex. It was the voice of nature awakening at the dawn of the aeon, as Aiwass uttered the word of the law of Delima. 2 paragraphs, short ones. So also shall he who invoketh often behold the formless fire, with trembling and bewilderment. But if he prolong his meditation, he shall resolve it into coherent and intelligible symbols, and he shall hear the articulate utterance of that fire, interpret the thunder thereof as a still small voice in his heart, and the fire shall reveal to his eyes his own image in its own true glory, and it shall speak in his ears the mystery that is his own right name. End quote. We are all made of this thing that we call the invisible light, the divine light, this fiery agent, right? If you get in touch with that, you will understand your nature, and if you understand your nature, you will understand the rest of nature, because it's all made from that substance. Going back to the Emerald Tablet on this one, it's like everything comes from this one substance, and that one substance is permutated into all of these many forms, as above, so below, right? And so if you can understand that one substance, when you go inside and you're getting in touch with that vitriol and the philosopher's stone, right? It's that one substance, that true essence of nature. When you could get in touch with that true essence of nature inside yourself, you realize it's everywhere, and you could come into contact and do your will with it as you will. And that's not what you want. That's your will. You have a nature, you need to enact that nature. You have that nature by necessity. There is a reason for it. You need to figure out what that is and do that nature in your will, or manifest that nature through your will. Quote, this then is the virtue of the magic of the beast, 666, and the canon of its proper usage, to destroy the tendency to discriminate between any two things in theory, and to practice to pierce the veils of every sanctuary, pressing forward to embrace every image. For there is none that is not very Isis. The inmost is one with the inmost, yet the form of the one is not the form of the other. Intimacy enacts fitness. He therefore who liveth by air, let him not be bold to breathe water, but mastery cometh by measure. To him who with labor, courage, and caution giveth his life to understand all that doth encompass him, and to prevail against it, shall be increase. The word of sin is restriction. Seek therefore righteousness, inquiring into iniquity, and fortify thyself to overcome it. End quote. Love is the law. Love under will. I'll catch you on the next one.